Just when it seemed like a Bernie blackout was ending, last week, while many were enjoying the Christmas holiday, CNN aired this graphic showing Bernie Sanders in fourth place amongst the 2020 Democratic presidential hopefuls. However, it seems that polling was from 6 weeks ago, and a Bernie Biden dust-up was for the books, which is pretty interesting.
Right. Joining us with the Sanders campaign's reaction to the polling and with an update on the campaign is Bernie Sanders' National Press Secretary, Briahna Joy Gray. Welcome, Briahna.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Briahna. So I think one of the things that was a bit of a dust-up was I think Bernie was in Los Angeles for this huge rally with AOC, and I think their own hometown paper did not cover it, I think, until Bernie visited the LA Times himself. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing rally. I believe the numbers were 14,000 people in attendance. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is arguably the most popular, interesting, engaging figure on the American left, spoke. It was coming on the heels of an amazing debate performance, and it was kind of remarkable that in this amazing setting on Venice Beach that kind of captured the imagination of the online world, there was not a peep from the hometown paper. So it's not, on me to say what causes any of these blips or not, but no one can argue that in the gestalt, you've seen time and time again events that seem more than newsworthy not covered. But what was fascinating and what was really gratifying to see was the number of people who were engaged in watching online, both streaming on Bernie's social media platforms and watching other places like on AOC's social media platforms. The engagement is through, and I think what we're going to see is there's going to be a real disconnect between what the outcomes are in this election from people who are only paying attention to mainstream media sources and those of us who are looking elsewhere, which are other places that are actually covering the news in a more comprehensive way.
As press secretary, have you been able to discern whether it's more on the reporter or the editor? Like, in other words, did the LA Times send a reporter and a photographer to the event and then they just decided not to run anything on it? Or did the editor say, you know what, there's a lot else going on, that'll be on Twitter, we don't even need to cover it? Like, what, have you looked into the process? And do you talk to reporters about, like, hey, big rally, maybe worth covering?
This particular event, that's a good question for our West Coast press secretary. So I'm not sure if they actually covered it. If they did, that would be quite remarkable, right? And it's hard to imagine a similar event of a similar magnitude simply not being covered, especially when you watch the coverage and you saw how engaged the crowds were. This is not a metric that we typically go by, but because it is LA, the number of high-profile kind of celebrity attendees there were, the amount of noise that was generated by this rally was extraordinary, and that's why this particular mission really stands out.
Mm-hmm. So, Briahna, I also want to get your reaction. The senator went after Joe Biden and said that Trump will eat his lunch over his Iraq war vote. Joe Biden had a bit of a strange response. Let's take a listen to that, and we'll get your reaction.
Senator Sanders says with your vote, Senator Sanders says with your vote on the Iraq war and trade that President Trump will eat your lunch in the general election. Will he eat your lunch?
Until we come about Gibson is 30 voices.
Who? President Trump or? Okay.
So there you have it, Briahna. Joe Biden says that he will offer dessert to the senator when he's in the White House in response to the substantive criticism on his Iraq war vote. What did the campaign make of that reaction?
That's a kind of a clear response to what was a substantive criticism. Let's not forget what happened in 2016. For all of the electability arguments that are being made, people often omit the kind of substantive electability arguments, which you are able to make by comparing what the respective vulnerabilities and strengths are between candidates. And in 2016, almost everybody ignored the fact that despite that fact that Donald Trump was vulnerable on his Wall Street ties, his history of corruption, the same similar types of vulnerabilities, though of course to a different magnitude, were featured by the Democratic nominee, right? So what ended up happening was she wasn't able to to punch as hard in certain areas that Trump was very vulnerable in and that he deserved to be condemned for. And we are potentially walking into that same kind of a matchup where Donald Trump ran on opposition to trade deals that ended up sending millions of American jobs overseas. He ran in opposition to the Iraq war, claiming with some factual inaccuracies that never done that, claiming again and again that he opposed the Iraq War before it started, and that he continued, and that part is true, that he continued to oppose it after it had started. And that record can be truthfully contrasted with the record of several people in this race, but notably not with Bernie Sanders, who again and again appears on the right side of history and won't be able to let Trump get to his left the way that so many Democratic candidates and our Democratic candidate in 2016 enabled him to do. And that is critical on top of all of the other electability metrics that broadly militate in Bernie Sanders' favor.
Mm-hmm. Pete Buttigieg recently made the same claim. I don't know if you saw this, but Buttigieg attacked Biden's war vote as well. He said he wouldn't go so far as to say as it disqualified him, but he said it was, I think he called it the biggest policy blunder in a generation or something like that, which is new. Like there hasn't really been kind of sniping back and forth between Buttigieg and Biden. What do you make of that? Do you think that Buttigieg sees Biden taking voters away from him, or there's something that he can get from Biden? And do you think that kind of supports your idea that people see his Iraq war vote as a genuine kind of electability problem?
I don't think any of us should be surprised that candidates are going to continue to draw contrast with Biden, who maintains his status as the front runner in this race. And I can't really opine as to what the particular thinking of the Buttigieg camp is. But look, it's a legitimate criticism that I think that Biden needs a better answer for than simply saying he's going to invite somebody to, aperitifs at the White House or what have you, right? At the end of the day, all of these candidates have to justify their records in order to explain to the American people why the bad choices they've made in the past aren't going to be replicated going forward. That's why it's so remarkable to have someone like Bernie Sanders, who does have a long, long record for people to scrutinize, just as long as Joe Biden. But whereas Joe Biden and other candidates are having to run away from that record and distinguish themselves from that record, Bernie Sanders is able to run on that record. And that's why I believe he has the highest favorables in the race. That's why he's the most trusted on a number of subjects that are rated as the most important to the American people, for example, healthcare, and also why he's considered to be one of the best candidates, I think the best candidate on foreign policy, because he's shown that kind of prescient judgment again and again and again when it comes to perhaps the greatest responsibility of the chief executive.
Mm-hmm. Briahna, we were talking a little bit earlier on the show about the RCP national polling average is basically exactly what it was a year ago, but with Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders holding respectively around 27% and 19% within the race. Now, we're 35 days now to the Iowa caucuses. How can we expect the senator to ramp up his campaign and close that gap with the former vice president? Is it going to be more attacks like this one, which is not something that we'd seen previously?
The one thing that I want to really, really drill down on this idea that substantively distinguishing yourself from other candidates is not what I would call an act. That's what I would call running a primary election. And Americans are owed as making those distinctions so they can make an informed choice in the ballot box. But also, I want to push back against this premise that people are in the exact same position as they were. The reality is there has been an enormous amount of movement already. And if you look not at polls from this time last year, when neither Bernie Sanders or Bernie Sanders wasn't in the race, what you should look at is the fact that over the past month, Bernie Sanders has closed an enormous gap between him and Joe Biden. But Joe Biden was upwards of double digits, polling above Bernie for a long time there, and Bernie has fluctuated in the polls. And what we've seen is Bernie's slow and steady climb, both maintaining a kind of steady pace while others jump up and down around him, but more recently really surging into a confident place where we don't just see generalized national. We see him coming into first or second place in all of the early states, polling number one with all non-white voters. He has been consistently doing better than any other candidate in terms of fundraising in those particular Obama to Trump districts, which everyone is looking at as a core of the electability argument. And of course, doing well overall in the general polls. Not to mention maintaining a strong fundraising status, which other candidates cannot say they've done. At various points in this race, Biden and now Warren and other leading candidates have struggled to maintain the same base. And we all know that Bernie Sanders has a unique strength there because he is pulling these consistent small dollar donations that people are setting on a monthly basis that are going to be able to carry him through in a way that other candidates won't see. So I think what you'll see going forward is a lot of separation there as we get into the really crucial, critical weeks of this election.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, Briahna. We always appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
See you, Briahna.
Bye. All right, next on Rising, could a 29-year-old college student and single mom unseat a 20-term incumbent Congressman, Steny Hoyer?
Michaela Wilkes explains what makes her candidacy different and why she believes Congressman Hoyer is out of touch with his constituents' needs when Rising continues.